In episode 156 of the 40 Plus Fitness podcast, we mix it up with a pause and discuss how pause training can improve your strength and performance. You can find the show notes for this episode at 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/156. Have you decided you're ready to make a change? To reclaim your health and fitness? The 40 Plus Fitness podcast is here for you. I'm your host, Alan Meisner. I'm an NSAM certified personal trainer with a specialization in corrective exercise and fitness nutrition. Let me be your coach as you find your way on your health and fitness journey. All right, let's go. Hello, thanks for being here today. Today we're going to talk about pauses in your fitness routine and how you can use pauses as an opportunity to get much stronger. When we're lifting, and I'll use some technical terms here, but I'll make sure to define them pretty well so that you understand what we're talking about. As you're lifting something, so let's start with something very simple like a bicep curl. I think that's something that you can understand fairly well, is that when you're doing a bicep curl and you bring the weight up, so the weight's down by your side, and you bring the weight up into that curling motion, and you're basically squeezing your bicep muscle on the front of your arm. That bicep muscle is actually shortening as you do that. So you're shortening that muscle to cause as a lever to cause the forearm to come up, to lift that weight up. That's called the concentric part of the exercise. So basically, the muscle shortening is working in a positive movement against the weight. So it's resisting the weight, but it's bringing the weight up. So it's moving the weight. There's more force coming out of that muscle than what the weight weighs. And therefore, you're doing this concentric move up. Okay, when the weight's going down and you're slightly resisting just letting it fall, so you're not just going to drop it, but you're literally just going to slowly lower it, that's the eccentric portion of the movement. So those are two basic movement patterns that the muscle has, and the muscle is actually strengthening during both of those. Okay, so as you do the concentric and then you do the eccentric, and here's a kind of a quick little tip, and I don't want you to use this too much, but a lot of times when people are trying to build strength, they'll use a process called negatives, which is basically the eccentric portion. During an eccentric move, you're actually stronger than you are on the concentric. So maybe you can't do a pull-up, but if you lifted yourself up and got into the middle part, the full up position of the pull-up, you would be able to slowly lower yourself down. So you might not have been able to pull yourself up, but you're definitely able to slowly lower yourself down. So that's a method that you can use to build the strength and muscle. But again, it's kind of more of an advanced term, so I don't really want to get too much into that. But I did want to kind of define the concentric and the eccentric parts of movements, because that kind of builds into the next stage of this. Now, a lot of times when we're trying to perform a lift, we're going to reach a point where we stop. We can't lift it. And that point, a lot of times, is called a sticking point. And you'll notice on certain exercises that there'll just be a point where you're just not getting the leverage. You're just not getting the muscle's not strong enough to continue the concentric movement. And if you're doing a heavy lift or doing something like a bench press or a squat, that puts you in a pretty scary position to not be able to complete that lift. And that's why if you are going to be doing some of these liftings and doing some of these things, you're going to want to make sure you're in a safe environment, either in some form of rack or you have a spotter to help you. But let's assume that you want to work on your bench press or your push-up. Let's just say the push-up, because I think that'll be a safer deal. So as you lower your body to the ground, that's the eccentric portion. And as you raise your body up, push your body up, that's the concentric, okay? Now, in this case, you're shortening your chest muscle and you're shortening your tricep. Those are the two primary movers in the push-up. So as you're doing this movement and you start noticing that you get stuck, but your stuck tends to be at one general spot each time that you're trying to do those last couple push-ups. You notice that you go down, and then right at the bottom is where maybe, at that full stretch of the chest. So now your chest is fully open, you're down at the bottom position, and you just don't have the strength to push yourself up. And you've transferred to the triceps as much as you can, and you're just pushing and you're not getting anywhere. But you can't seem to get past that push-up each time you're doing a workout. So what a pause will do is a pause is an opportunity for you to build strength in a given zone. So what I would say is after you've done a workout like that, now let's put in a pause set. And what we're going to do is we're going to go down into the push-up and let ourselves all the way down to the bottom. Maybe let your chest sit on the ground for a second. Put your hands on the floor and push up to that range where you were just struggling to do that push. So right down, we said it was at that bottom position. So right as your chest is low, you're having a problem. And what I want you to do is just push up just a little and then pause for a second. And you may be able to hold this for 2, maybe 3 seconds, and then you're going to start noticing that your body wants to go down. Let it rest a little bit. But that zone, working a pause, working in that zone for a period of time is going to give you an opportunity to build strength. And this type of movement, when you're still, where you're resisting against the weight, but the weight's not moving back down in that eccentric, is called an isometric hold. It's an isometric move. And isometrics are really one of the best strength builders that we have. Just pushing against an immovable object sounds kind of strange, but can actually build a ton of strength. The problem typically is it's just hard to get full range of motion because you aren't working within a range of motion. You're literally in a fixed position. So it's really only applicable in my mind on those times when it's, where you're stuck, where you need to build strength in one particular point in your range of motion. And that's not a typical thing in the way that we live our lives, but it is something that you can use as a tool when you're struggling with a certain lift, when you're struggling to do a certain movement. I also like to use pauses in particular places where I have movement issues. So for me, the very, very bottom of the squat sometimes gets a little difficult because my body wants to lean forward a little bit more than it should. Now, that's not typically a big problem when I'm doing body weight squats, but it can be a bigger problem for me when I'm trying to actually lift some weight. So when I'm doing squats, a lot of times what I'll do is before I go do the squat, I'll go and I'll warm up pretty good, and then I'll get into the very, very bottom of that squat position. And I'll sit down in that bottom position for a period of time. And that helps me kind of open up my hips and get my calves and all loosened up, gives me the dorsiflexion in my feet, gets me in a good position to be able to do a good form squat. Another way that I'll use pauses in a squat is I will literally take the weight down to the bottom, and then I'll sit there for a period of time. Now, this does one thing. This is not really an isometric move at this point because I'm at the end of a range of motion. But what it does do at that bottom point there is it allows me to eliminate momentum. So that's another use for a pause that can be kind of beneficial. Is a lot of times when we're doing a lift, like a push-up or a squat, there's a kind of a bounce, an elastic bounce of the muscle when you go to the bottom and you come back up, or go to the, when you're doing that bottom to come back up, there's just this little bounce. So that little bit of momentum, that little bounce that you would get, this eliminates that. When you go and you stop in a bottom position and then you're pressing with no general momentum to start with, that's, again, another great way to make sure that you're using a pause to help build really good strength. So today, to recap that, I've given you 2 ways to kind of use a pause. The first one is using the pause as a way of getting through a sticking point. So if there's a point in one of your lifts where you're really struggling and you notice a lack of strength to get you past that point, you can do some isometric work in that range, right around that area, and that's going to help you build strength at that point and help you get through that lift a lot easier later, build some strength there. And then the other way is to use the pause as a way of stopping momentum so that you're truly using the full muscle to do the movement and not just relying on momentum to help you get through it. So I hope you found this useful. We'll talk soon. Thank you for spending time with me today and listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it, would you please share it with some friends and family? Thank you. Next time on the 40 Plus Fitness podcast, we talk about narrative. What is your inner story and how is it affecting your health and fitness? Until then, have a happy and healthy day.